Welcome back. You're still tuned into the Wednesday edition of the nation's most favorite breakfast show, Good Morning Namibia. We are continuing with green hydrogen matters. This is day 2, the final day of the Namibia National Green Hydrogen Conference 2022 underway at the Windhoek Country Club. Now, Hyphen Hydrogen Energy is a project development company established with the objective of developing, constructing and operating green hydrogen production facilities in Namibia to supply international and regional markets. Namibia is uniquely placed, as we know, to be an important role player in the world of decarbonization through green hydrogen. Joining us with more details this morning is the Chief Executive Officer of Hyphen, that is Mr. Marco Raffinetti. Good morning, sir, and welcome to Good Morning Namibia.
Thank you, Denver. Very nice to be here this morning.
How are you doing on this gift of a Wednesday morning?
Absolutely brilliant. Love being in Namibia and love being in Windhoek.
We love having you. Yeah. So what the average Namibian wants to know, how exactly will they benefit from green hydrogen and from the projects that are underway? So could you tell us about what Hyphen will do to see to it that Namibians optimally benefit from it?
So I think there's two parts to that, answers to that question. I think the first part is, as the first project in the country, we've got an enormous responsibility to work closely with government to establish the framework and the architecture for the establishment of an industry. Hyphen is but one of what we think could be 50 projects in Namibia. And the measurement of success, I think, for Namibia and certainly for ourselves, is to create the platform that launches an industry, not just implements a project. So that is the fundamental goal that we've set for ourselves. In terms then of our project and how our project will benefit Namibia, I think Namibia has been incredibly astute in how they have structured this industry. Namibia will be the partner of the private sector in rolling out this industry. So Namibia will owns the land on which the project is located, so land rentals go to government. The product that we sell will attract royalties, which will go to government. And then from a taxing perspective, all the local taxes will be collected. So that's then on the fiscal side. In terms of the equity partnership, government has an option to take up to a 24% equity interest in the project on behalf of the Namibian people. We think that is a really, really important option for government to take up, and we really hope that government is able to do that. This is sort of similar to the way that Norway has developed their industry, where you effectively have a sovereign wealth fund that encapsulates this value and protects it and grows it for the benefit of Namibia. That's at a macro level. Then at a micro level, in terms of our project, we then have enormous impact on the area of Luderitz where our project is located. So if you think of the number of people that we need to employ in that area, we need about 15,000 people during the construction period, 3,000 people during operations. The whole town is about 15,000 people of informal accommodation. So it's an enormous impact on that local community. That's going to drive a whole lot of business opportunities for Namibia. And then outside of that, if you've got 50 projects in a country, the opportunities for vertical integration across the supply chain is enormous. So when the 50th project is built, a lot of the equipment that has to be imported for the first project should be made in Namibia. It makes complete sense to do that. And that journey, I know government is plotting out that strategy of how do they make that long journey a reality. We just need to make sure as a first stepping stone project that we, with a blank piece of canvas, which Namibia is physically with your land as well as with the environment, is to really lay down that solid foundation to launch your industry.
Thank you, sir. I want us to have regard for a bit about those two figures that you mentioned, 15,000 for the construction phase and then 3,000 as well. What periods are we talking about? Because if you can employ 15,000 people and it's only for a month, it might not make such an immense impact. But I just want us to provide a bit of perspective, please.
So I think that's a great question. So construction industry is normally boom and bust. It goes through a very cyclical up and down as it moves with the economy. The jobs that we will need, the 15,000 people that we need for the construction period, we execute our project roughly in 2 phases, and we would need those 15,000 people for a period of 4 years. What we would hope and what we'd see government lining up to do is allocate additional land parcels that then you have similarly sized projects coming after us. Those people that are used, that have to be employed, trained up, skilled in order to execute those construction activities, should be well then positioned in order to move and work on the second project and the third project. By the time you build 50 of these projects in Namibia, you have to start replacing the equipment from the first project. So these jobs become perpetual in nature. And we've worked out that if you get to 50 projects in Namibia, we think the potential just in solar and wind and rebuilding those projects every single year as they come to the end of life, you need around 200,000 people. So it's an enormous opportunity for the country. If we look at, I think the unemployment numbers, we were talking to the University of Namibia, is somewhere in the order of 40,000 people in the country. It's a big number in relation to Namibia's population. But I think in terms of the opportunity that this industry represents, it's a very real opportunity to really drive employment in the country and drive the Gini coefficient down, upwardly lift people economically, because the opportunity is just so very, very big.
Thank you. The analogy of a blank canvas that you used earlier is quite a powerful one. And from my perspective, it could be used both in a literal and a figurative sense. Figurative in the way that it represents the opportunities that are seemingly endless, but also literal in the sense that it is a pristine area. And it's one that we'd like to preserve accordingly. Absolutely. And I think we need to touch on that element a bit. How will we see to it that we preserve the pristine nature of that area?
So it is an absolutely beautiful area. I think few people in Namibia have had the opportunity to actually go into that area because of the diamond mining licenses and laws that restrict it, but it is truly a stunning and beautiful area. Every single decision that we make in the design of the project is how do we minimize the impact on the environment. So if we look at the park, there's different levels of biodiversity in the park. There's very, very sensitive levels that have plants that are endemic only to that area. From a development perspective, those are no-go areas. They're simply not even considered for potential development. The plan is to locate assets only in those areas that have the least environmental impact and are the least sensitive. So if you look at our design, when we get to that point, the wind turbines are located more closer towards the coast. Nothing on the coastal line, because there's big bird migratory paths up and down the coastal line. So we at least 10 kilometers in from the bird migratory paths to ensure that we don't impact on avian fauna. And then from a infrastructure perspective, every single lens we look through is how do we absolutely reduce to the minimum the amount of infrastructure that actually needs to be developed in the country, in the region. And what we've discussed with government is building what we call common use infrastructure. So if there's going to be 10 projects in Namibia in that particular area, it probably makes sense for us for each project not to have 10 separate roads servicing their projects. Let's have one road that can service all the projects. And that's the model that we've been discussing with government. It's very complicated, but the idea would be if you can have a limited amount of infrastructure that services multiple people, multiple projects, you reduce dramatically the impact on the environment. From an environmental perspective, we will ascribe to the highest environmental standards. There's something called the Equator Principles that are governed by effectively set by the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation, that dictate what is the best global standard in terms of how to develop responsibly, socially responsibly, environmentally responsibly, because it's not just the environment, it's also from a social aspect. And we will ascribe to those highest standards. And that's our commitment to Namibia. We're doing this project because we are environmentalists at heart, and we are trying to do good in terms of driving decarbonization. What we cannot do is destroy a pristine environment trying to achieve that. That's a cost that's too high.
Thank you. The platform that we need to establish has a number of elements. And one that you just referred to, of course, relates to infrastructure to ultimately minimize the impact on the environment. But the other important one that also featured, especially yesterday afternoon during day one of the conference, relates to the establishment of a regulatory and a legislative framework. Because it's one thing to undertake to preserve the pristine environment, but it's something else if there are no laws that regulate that conduct. From where you're coming from and from the role that you have been playing and that you continue to play, what do you make of the significance of such a regulatory and legislative framework to see to it that we are all on the same page and that our conduct is regulated properly?
It's absolutely critical. Without a clear set of rules that govern an entire industry, it's absolutely essential that that gets done properly, appropriately, and that it enables the right responses from people. It drives the right behavior. And the lawyers will make a lot of money out of establishing a new industry, because effectively, to your analogy of the blank canvas, from a legislative environment, yes, there's a lot of legislation in Namibia. I think, one of the only countries in the world that enshrines the environment into your constitution. That's very unique. That needs to be catered for in a set of legislation. And what we've discussed with government, and where government is leaning towards, is having a bespoke set of legislation that is designed specifically for this industry. And there is no blueprint for this. Nobody's done this in the world. People are starting to think about this and are starting to do it. So on our side and on government side, we've brought on advisors to help us chart through this path, because it is not just for the project. So if you compare it, say, to the diamond mining industry, the Spergebied, for a long time, it was one company, and there was one act that dealt with that one company. Here you need to have a legislative environment that's going to attract 50 projects, 49 projects after ours. That's the end objective of that legislation. Do it in a way that, from the international investment community, that drives trust. In terms of local Namibians, it drives trust, and only if you get that balance right, is Namibia going to be successful in rolling out this industry.
As we're starting to wrap up our conversation this morning, the chairperson of the Economic Association of Namibia, Mr. Jason Kasutu, yesterday said part of the proverbial pollution that Namibia is dealing with at the moment relates to poverty, relates to unemployment, relates to gross inequality. And our head of state, Dr. Hage Geingob, has committed to the economic emancipation of Namibians. We are under pressure to accomplish that economic transformation for the benefit of our people. So that makes some Namibians quite impatient. What are we looking at in terms of timelines for all of this, briefly?
So we know people are impatient, but these are very big, very complicated projects. So where we are at the moment in the process with government is, we were awarded preferred bidder status last year at COP26 in November. Since then, we've done a massive amount of work to drive towards concluding the necessary agreements by the end of this year with government, in order to enable us to go and do all the detailed engineering studies, the detailed environmental studies that need to be completed, engage with off-takers, raise the funding from the international markets, because the Southern African Common Monetary Area simply doesn't have the balance sheet to support this. It will come from international markets. And so it's roughly a 2-year period from the end of this year to get to a point where we start building. And then it's a 2-year period in order to then, for the first phase of the project to become operational. And I think, from the Namibian perspective, we know that people are impatient. We've already employed our first 6 local Namibians. We've taken out our lease on our first office. It's busy being fitted out now. We're using Namibian Construction is doing the fit out of that office. So we're using local Namibian expertise. You've got an awesome granite. We're using all your granite in our offices. So we're really committed to, from the very inception of the project, committed to spending and securing as much of the project internally within the country that the project is able, that the country is able to provide in terms of resources, because we know that impatience is there. So we're starting at the very beginning, but this is a long, complicated process that we're embarking upon.
I'm happy you're acknowledging that. Yeah. Any final thoughts this morning before we let you go?
I think I'd just like to say, Denver, to the people of Namibia, this is an amazing opportunity for Namibia and for all Namibians. And the way this has been set up by government, the structure will create generational wealth. From our view, the establishment of this industry will create generational wealth that can be used to address exactly the social challenges that Namibia faces. If you look at Norway as an example, it went in one generation from being one of the poorest countries in Europe to, on a per capita basis, the richest country in Europe and one of the richest countries in the world. But done in a sound, fundamental way that respects democratic values and that shares the wealth with the people through the structures that are being created. So not consolidating that wealth in the hands of the few, but consolidating it under government control, but for the benefit of the many. And I think, for me, that's the exciting part of this. Yes, this is a great project. Yes, it benefits internationally in terms of decarbonization. But as a human being, to work on a project where you can do something that has the potential to fundamentally change the trajectory of a country and lift a country up is truly incredible. It's a massive responsibility, and it's one that we take incredibly seriously, and that ultimately is the measure of success.
Thank you very much for your time and best of luck.
Thank you, Denver. Great talking to you.
There you have it, Mr. Marco Raffinetti, Chief Executive Officer of Hyphen, talking to us about their involvement in green hydrogen in the land of the brave. We will be right back after a brief break.